Dearest Queers, happy Monday morning. Thanks for joining me here today for the second episode of Dearest Queers. Um, I'm Doolin. I'm a healer and mentor. I work with queer and trans folks struggling with feelings of loneliness and disconnection. So we talk about strategies for connection around that, how to have relationships that feel good and equitable and enjoyable. So this is the second week that I'm doing this live series, which was inspired by a survey I sent out in mid-May asking folks about their feelings around disconnection and loneliness. I got lots of good responses and questions from folks, and so I wanted to begin addressing them, and that's why I'm doing this live series. And today is our second question is, how do I feel less drained by people? I love this question so much. I feel it so hard. I feel like energetic boundaries has been something that I have made myself quite the student of, as my life has asked for. So I'm excited to talk about that today. So to the asker of the question, thank you for this question, and I love you, and I see you, and I think that you're asking this question for a lot of people. A lot of people have this question. I hear about this all the time, like, why is this exchange so exhausting? How can I feel less exhausted in my interactions with people? So let's talk about that today. So we're talking about, this is a question about energetic boundaries, about boundaries with people. And so many of us, I feel like in queer and trans communities, are familiar with the spoon theory, which comes out of the disability community, folks with chronic illness. And so that metaphor talks about, that each of us, based on our experience in the world, has like a certain allotment of spoons throughout the day that, so if getting out of bed takes a certain amount of spoons, then I have fewer. And if this takes so many spoons, then I have fewer, etc. And so I want to expand on that metaphor a little bit, or shift it just slightly, because what I like about spoon theory is that it presents these very concrete things, that if I do this thing, then I have one fewer spoon or whatever. And the thing with energetic boundaries, and oftentimes why these interactions and exchanges with people leave us feeling drained, is because we aren't even aware that we are leaking our energy, that we're even giving it. And so that's why the metaphor feels a little different to me, because oftentimes the exchange or what we're leaking out is unintentional. And so part of this, the answer to this question is, how do we become in greater awareness with ourselves and our energy and the ways that we are giving it out to the world? So I think more about, this question of energetic boundaries in terms of like a leaky bucket. So if we are a vessel or a container, filled with whatever, flat water or sparkling water or OJ or purple stuff, like whatever you want to fill it with, that these little times throughout the day that we unintentionally leak our energy to other people, it's just a hole in the bucket. It just like pierces it, and then that liquid or energy reserve begins to drain out. And then by either the end of that interaction with people or an accumulation over the day, like our bucket is empty and we are like feeling left drained and wondering why. Because oftentimes these things feel less like overt or in our awareness than some of these like larger things that we concretely know that we're putting our energy towards, like going to get groceries or feeding the cats in the morning or whatever. So those are very like concrete things, and then these smaller things that we're unaware of are also like leaking energy. So you might be asking, what are some examples of those unintentional energy leaks, right? I had the same question around that, and I began to, my work is around like in helping folks like in relationship feeling like lonely and disconnected. And so these unintentional leaks, they're happening in relationship. And oftentimes they come from ways of relating that we learned at a very young age. And so if we were parentified as a child, or we had to like take care of a parent who had, or a caregiver who maybe had mental illness or some other thing, we began to equate either our worth or understanding that we would get things in relationship by doing these things. And so until we become aware of and decide to change those things deliberately, like that's how we're interacting with people. And so these are like very small things, and things that I didn't even realize that I was doing until I started to become aware of these patterns. And so this was things like, the way that I would send texts to friends and would like either care for them without them asking for it, or like reach out to see how they were doing, or like work really hard to get them to tell me what they needed. Like I was just expending so much energy trying to like be in relationship with these folks because that's how I knew how to be in relationship. But it was an unbelievable amount of like energy exertion and leakage on my end, that I like wasn't even aware of that was happening, because I had, in my body or in my relational system, I equated those things within being in relationship and then like getting what I needed. But I wasn't getting what I needed at all, which was like authentic and intimate connection, right? So those are some examples. There's also like larger scale things where like I make other people's business my business. Just a lot of like codependent patterning. So like, yeah, just involving myself in other people's stories and experiences and trying to, and oftentimes, and like we do that as like partners and friends. But what I'm encouraging, or like part of my unpacking of that, was beginning to realize like what belonged to me and what didn't. Like where did my energy stop here? Like what belonged to me as a sovereign being, and like what was other people's. And when I began to like untangle that, which took very intentional and like committed work to do, I began to see what belonged to me and what didn't belong to me, and how much energy I was expending giving into the stuff that didn't belong to me. Like the awareness of this pattern for me sort of culminated at the end of 2018, early 2019. And I began to like shift some major relationships in my life and sort of entered myself into like the school of boundaries. I highly recommend the podcast Beyond Bitchy. I know the name is like a little like whatever. I still feel like whatever about the name. But it's a social worker. Her name's Vicky Tidwell Palmer. If you have like followed my work for a while, I have mentioned her before because it's a really good podcast and like really helped shift my work around boundaries. And realizing like what didn't belong to me, and in listening to that, I tried this experiment like early spring, summer last year, where I stopped like over giving in my relationships. I just kind of stopped. And part of the experiment was to see that when I stopped or sort of withdrew all of this energy that I was putting into them, like would those relationships sustain? Like would they carry on, or would they not? And that would tell me a lot of information. Part of that was also my commitment to knowing that resting in the discomfort of that spaciousness between like that relationship and what I actually wanted in my life, which were reciprocal relationships where it didn't feel like I was having to pour in energy to keep them going. Because I don't know about you, but that's not the type of relationship that I wanted then or want currently. And so making that choice to bring my energy back and then invest that into either myself, which was uncomfortable in a new pattern, or into the types of relationships that I was actually wanting. So that's one example of like an experiment or like behavioral change, just to begin to see, what comes up when I begin to shift my energetic pattern in these relationships. Am I left, are people like reaching back when I reach out? Or when I don't reach out, are they reaching out? Again, a lot of information. That's similar to like last week's question, and I'm guessing all of the future questions that I will address here is that we're talking about a relationship with self. Like that is like our relationships externally mirror what's happening with us. And so if we're feeling drained in our relationships, there's some sort of hole in our bucket here that deserves some of our attention, and deserves our energy being poured back in this direction towards ourselves. Another sort of like experiment or like way to look at this winter, I was doing, Ashley Wood is her name, one of my teachers, and her program is called Align Within. It's all about trusting yourself and like listening to our messages that are coming through. But one of the practices in that was this for an entire week, which is a lot, but to track hour by hour throughout the day, like to pause, like set a timer in your phone or whatever, to pause and say, what am I doing at 8 a.m. in the morning, and how do I feel about that? And what is my energy like in that? Am I like in solo time doing meditating and writing, and how does that feel? And then like 1 p.m., am I in a meeting with so and so during work, and how do I feel in that? What is my energy like? Do I feel drained? Do I feel lit up? Because part of this is the flip side of like, how do I stop feeling so drained, is also paying attention to like, what is the shit that lights us up? Like, what are the friendships that like really make us feel on fire and that we feel excited about, and that after we like come out of that group setting or whatever, that like I feel excited about life, I feel great, I feel sort of like, I feel like my best self, and those are the people that I want to be around. In contrast to what are these relationships that where I feel like coming out of them, like I just feel like trash, I feel low energy, I don't feel good about myself. Like that's important information. Like our bodies and our energy response to that contain so much important information. We just need to be attuned to that and what they're telling us. And then oftentimes like make some hard decisions about shifting that and making choice towards something that feels better in the ways that we want to feel in those relationships and in those settings. And sometimes, I can like hear the argument right now that like, well, what if it's a work relationship or these family relationship or relationships seemingly where we have obligation or like we like need to show up for them and like be open to this drain. And I just would like push back against that a little bit. I think in most cases, we often have choice. It's just that decision might be hard or bring up conflict or drama that we don't really want to like have to deal with. And so we just continue to show up in these same relationship patterns and these sort of like default ways of offering ourselves and offering our energy, even though it feels terrible, because that's just like how it's always done. And it's easier to sort of like go along with the flow than to stop that and say, like, I don't want to feel drained anymore. Like, I want to call my energy back to me. I want to be intentional with choice about how I spend my energy, And so if you choose to go into the relationships that feel draining, then that's great. That's choice. But I think that's the difference here between paying attention or just sort of doing things on default or to go with the flow, status quo, because that's how we've always done it, or paying attention and saying this is how I feel in my body or in my spirit or in my psychology or whatever after spending time in this relationship, and then I'm going to choose from there. If it's a boss or a family member, I mean, we could do a whole series on energetic boundaries or just boundaries, and that like if it's a setting or relationship where we have to continue to show up, there are even ways within that we can manage our energy instead of just, if I feel like, so if my boss, for instance, like takes up a lot of space and we have these like energetic space, they just talk and talk and talk, and I can't ever, get anything in edgewise and blah, blah, blah. Like, how do I protect myself around that? Like, there are very clear, there are like meditations and rituals you can do where you can like literally sort of like zip yourself up in like energetic protection, like going into these spaces, and just being very intentional about like what we're letting in. I think that it's been my experience and, my personal experience and also being part of community is that many of us were not raised like with good boundaries or energetic boundaries, period. And that's no blame to us at all. And we have a responsibility and choice at this point in our lives about how we do that. And so, I lost my train of thought. Just not being, that was where I'm going. So like not being raised with like good boundaries and being aware of that, but also like I know so many of us were just like the tender queers, right? Like a lot of us are empaths, just a lot of like sensitivity in the world, so much sensitivity. And so it's almost like before ever going out into the world, like this is a practice that we should be doing, is like learning how to protect it, because our energy is like our most precious resource. Like it is ours, it belongs to us. And like we are responsible for it, and like how we emit it into the world and how we just take care of it, how we take care of ourselves. And so even if we didn't have the training, these are things we can learn. I know many of us are sensitive. I know many of us are here to be like healers and helpers and are so receptive to other people's stuff. And that's okay. And like, yes, but like, let's learn how to like take good care of that and wield that power and like do it with intention and choice instead of just being a receptacle for other people's stuff. Because that isn't healing. Like that's not helping people at all, actually. That's just like terrible boundaries and will make you feel drained and exhausted. That is just like the truth of that. So like the simple answer to the question is, how do I feel less drained in my relationships with people? Well, one would be to like, I don't know, perhaps like look at these relationships in these settings and are they serving you? That's one question. But like the deeper answer in that is to like to get in sort of like righter or like right relationship with yourself around awareness of what's going on there. Like really begin to like sit, whether that's hour by hour or however that breaks down for you or works, like throughout the day, whether you want to take one day and do it, like whatever doesn't feel overwhelming, because it has to be a manageable practice or else you aren't going to commit to it. But like begin to pay attention, like at this part of the day with this person doing this activity, like how does that feel in my body? Do I feel excited? Do I feel drained? Do I feel exhausted? Do I feel overwhelmed? Do I feel afraid? Like what is coming up in those interactions? And that is the beginning place. And then implementing some of the practices on top of that, is an answer for another time. So that's what I have for today on how do I feel less drained around people. If you have any questions or need support around this, or like have want to like talk it out or get some clarity, please reach out to me. Like I said, this is like one of my favorite conversations always to have, is around boundaries and learning how to be a sovereign being and what belongs to us and what belongs to others. It's very freeing, and I can I will stake my reputation on it and claim 100% that like when you begin to understand this and navigate this for yourself, that you will have more energy, just period. That's just the truth of it. So, yeah. So I'm Gray Doolin, and I will be back next Monday morning at 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time for the third episode of Dearest Queers. If you have a question that you'd like for me to answer, please send that over via DM. And I love you all very much. I hope you're taking good care, and I'll talk soon.